Right. Good evening, everyone. We're going to commence this unscheduled overview and scrutiny committee meeting of the Resources Committee. Thank you all for gathering tonight. I know some of you have broken off from holiday to be here. If I can start with the usual formalities. There's no fire evacuation procedures scheduled for this evening, so if the fire alarm does go off, then please vacate the building and go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. This meeting is a webcast, so we welcome those who are joining us live on the internet. Could everyone ensure that your phones are either turned off or switched off or turned to silent? Microphones, again, members and officers, can we make sure that everyone can hear us here and on the internet by speaking clearly into the microphone? Right. So this is a call-in procedure, which is not something that happens too often, and I'm conscious that there are a number of new councillors here, so I am going to spend a bit of time just going through the process so that we're all clear. And in fact, there may be even more established councillors who've not had the experience of a call-in. Before I do that, if I can just turn to the agenda, apologies for absence and substitutions. So I think we've got apologies for absence from Councillor Johnstone. I see that Councillor McCormack's just arrived. Is Councillor Banerjee going to be with us?
I will offer his apologies.
Right, okay, thank you. And substituting for Councillor Jordan, we welcome Councillor Trum. Good evening, Councillor. So, next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest they want to raise? No. So, our single topic for tonight is a call-in on the on Vine Meadow car park, which is the council car park close to the railway station. The call-in has been requested by 5 councillors, and it's in relation to the Cabinet's decision taken on the 9th of July, so very recently, to agree in principle to support the disposal via a conditional land sale of the council's car park at Vine Meadow to a preferred partner registered provider, a housing association, for less than best consideration upon the basis that the disposal is likely to contribute to the improvement of the economic, social and environmental well-being of the area and its residents, pursuant to Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972, to enable the delivery of affordable housing on the basis that the car park is surplus to the council's operational requirements. So now I'm going to just, I hope for everyone's benefit, talk a bit about the role of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. In our constitution, our role is a key element in the leader cabinet model which we have in Basingstoke for decision making. Our committee is encouraged to provide a constructive, critical friend, and to amplify the voices and concerns of the public. And I think it's very important for tonight that we promote and maintain an ethos of mutual respect, trust and courtesy between us all. This is, as part of the Constitution, an opportunity for the Cabinet who made the decision to be held to account on behalf of the electorate. And we are looking to assist the Cabinet in the development of the policy framework. Now, there are reports that have not been released to the public domain. They're confidential, and when considering the way that this committee should best run tonight, in consultation with officers, we're pretty confident that there are going to be confidential aspects of the reports that the councillors who've made the call in will wish to raise, and also committee members will want to talk about and ask questions about. So for everyone's benefit, although the principle for a public body like Basingstoke and Dean Council should be that all our discussions are in public, there are occasions, and it's contemplated under the Local Government Act 1972, Section 12A, that there are occasions when it's necessary to exclude the public from certain exempt categories, particularly those where there is commercially sensitive information, and I think that is clearly the case here. So, but that does not mean that we are going to, it prevents us from discussing and raising those issues, but we will do that in private session. But at the end of it, a decision will be made, and that will still be recorded and made public. So the next point I wanted to make was just a brief introduction to the decision. So as I said, the decision was made on the 9th of July by the Cabinet to agree in principle to support the disposal of Vine Meadow Car Park. Now that disposal is subject to a satisfactory scheme, agreement of heads of terms, agreement of a satisfactory scheme and a Section 123 valuation, and the grant of planning permission for the development of Vine Meadow Car Park for affordable housing. Proof of funding will be required, and there is to be an inclusion of an option for the council to repurchase Vine Meadow Car Park at the disposal price from the successful housing association if the planning permission is not implemented or the development is not completed within a defined period. There needs to be a notification of any subsidy under the Subsidy Control Act. The authority is delegated to the Director of Regeneration in consultation with a Cabinet Member for Resident Services and Housing and Cabinet Member for Finance and Property to finalise heads of terms for the disposal of the site to a housing association and to enter into a conditional contract for sale and to conclude the transaction. So the decision taken by the Cabinet was a decision in principle. Following the Cabinet meeting, the Cabinet's decision was called in at the request of 5 councillors in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 18 of the Overview and Scrutiny Procedure Rules. And the monitoring officer determined that the call-in was valid and could take place. Correct? Good, okay. And so I'll leave it to the councillors making the call in to set out their grounds, but essentially they're challenging: is the site genuinely surplus to operational requirements? Is a disposal at less than best consideration justified under Section 123 of the Local Government Act? has the anticipated economic, social and environmental well-being benefits been robustly evidenced, and are the parameters established by Cabinet appropriate, given that they will frame the options available under the delegated authority. So that sets out the background to the call-in. I think we tonight have, as a committee, there are two outcomes that are available under the Constitution. And if you just bear with me, I'll find that. So, as set out in the report's recommendations, the only decisions the committee can make tonight are to take no further action, in which case the decision will take effect immediately, or refer the decision back to the decision maker for reconsideration, setting out the nature of the committee's concerns. The decision maker must then reconsider the matter within a further 10 working days, taking into account the concerns of the committee before making a final decision. Right. So, nearly there with me. The last part that I want to address is the proposed format for tonight's meeting, which all the committee members have been notified about. So it's essentially going to be in two parts, the public part and then the private session, before we resume into public session. Part one, public session, the chair will open the meeting, and I'm doing that. Then the Director of Resident Services will present a PowerPoint overview of the Vine Meadow decision. That's Fiona Darby. The councillors who asked for the decision to be called in will be asked to explain the reasons for their requests so far, as they relate to matters which can be raised in public and what they feel should be reviewed. Now, you're under the Constitution, the five of you, I think, is it four of you or three of you tonight? Right, okay. Up to 25 minutes for the signatories is allowed. We don't have any members of the public, correct? That's correct. Yeah. And no visiting councillors. Oh, right, okay. And then the relevant cabinet members will be invited to make any comments. Now, is that tonight Councillor Harvey, the leader? And Councillor James, the co-leader? That's right, yes. Good, thank you very much. Yes, I know, yeah. So, then we go into, if there is a request that we go into private session, we will have to formally adopt that, and the chair will invite the councillors who asked the decision to be called in to state any reasons for calling or what they feel should be reviewed in as far as it relates to the confidential information to be discussed in private session. So you have 25 minutes in total, so your 25 minutes has to be apportioned between public and private session. Then members of the committee will ask questions of cabinet members and officers in attendance. I think there will also be an opportunity to ask questions of the signatories, call-in signatories. After that has been concluded, we will resume the public meeting and we will I will have the role of summing up, and the signatories will be invited to indicate whether they are satisfied that their concerns have been adequately considered at the meeting, and cabinet members will be invited to make any final comments on the matter. And then finally, the committee having considered all the evidence presented to the meeting, will make one of the following decisions: take no further action or refer it back to the cabinet. Okay. So, I think then if we could open the public session with the presentation from Fiona, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
This one.
I have 4 slides that I'd like to present to the committee that sort of take you through the background and context to the decision and its importance to achieving service priorities. So the first slide here just sets out the need in the borough for affordable housing against what's being delivered currently. So we've over 4,400 households on the housing register and 1,500 households that are seeking to buy through our low-cost ownership scheme. We have approximately 2,000 approaches for homelessness advice every year, and so our successive housing and homelessness strategies have all set out the strong commitment that the council has to affordable housing delivery. And finally, we've slightly missed our target for affordable housing delivery last year, and we anticipate slightly missing it again this year. Thanks, Ron. So this slide summarises, in very small print, apologies, what's been undertaken to respond to the council's priority toward affordable housing delivery. So there was a council motion in December 2022 that was unanimously supported to build affordable homes. Cabinet endorsed this a month later, and the affordable housing priority was included in the update approved by Cabinet and then Council in October 2023. Economic Planning and Housing Committee looked at affordable housing in October 2023 and also considered the option of the Council directly delivering housing. The Accelerated Affordable Housing Programme was further considered by the Resident Services Committee in November 24 and an update provided. Audit and Accounts Committee acknowledged that the Vine Meadow car park was a consideration for disposal in November 25. And Cabinet, as you know, discussed affordable housing options on the 6th of May this year and made this in principle decision to dispose of Vine Meadow on the 9th of July, which led to this call-in. Thank you. So turning to Vine Meadow car park specifically, we identified this site as an option following a really detailed strategic land review. Vine Meadow car park is an operational asset in current use. We commissioned a lot of really detailed work on our car parks and car parking need, and this work confirmed that there was a surplus of car parking against the need in the borough. And Vine Meadow has the lowest occupancy levels, and it was deemed surplus to requirements. We then undertook capacity and viability studies. Those were conducted and concluded, and the aspiration for 100% affordable housing on this site meant that we believe that this might result in a disposal at less than best consideration. So it's the in-principle decision to dispose for affordable housing, which you're of course scrutinising this evening, and this fully complies with the Local Government Act 1972. My final slide just summarises the proposed next steps. Firstly, bids would be invited from registered providers who would be asked to submit an indicative scheme of the site. Any bids received would be evaluated on the basis of value for money and wider environmental and social value. The recommendations made clear that any disposal would be subject to Section 123 valuation report and a satisfactory scheme. At this stage, we don't know if there are going to be any bids, and we don't know whether there's going to be a satisfactory scheme that emerges from the work that we've done up to this stage. And so a scrutiny committee will, of course, have that opportunity to scrutinise again if we did have a preferred scheme, we identified one, and prior to any final decision. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Okay, now, I'd like to invite the councillors who have called in the decision to set out their reasons for the request. And this is, again, if I can just make it clear that this has to be material that is, it can be discussed in public at this stage. And you have 25 minutes in total. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and probably three of us will be doing the speaking. Firstly, I'd like to thank you and the committee for considering this call-in. I want to begin by making one point absolutely clear. This is about getting the best deal for the public. The call-in is not about whether affordable housing is a good thing, nor is it about preventing affordable housing from being delivered, but in fact, maybe more. We've already heard the administration are missing their own target. It is not even about determining the detailed terms of any future disposal, because those matters remain delegated and will come before future decision-making processes. Instead, this is about governance, and there are questions around process. It is about whether the Cabinet had sufficient evidence to make the decisions that it has already made about Vine Meadow being surplus to operational requirements, that the site should be disposed of at less than best consideration, that doing so is likely to improve the economic, social and environmental well-being of the borough, and that the future of the strategic public asset should be affordable housing. Those are significant decisions already. They establish the framework for everything that follows. Although officers retain delegated authority over future stages, this decision has already narrowed the range of options available. That is why scrutiny at this stage really matters. The Deputy Monitoring Officer has helpfully clarified that today's scrutiny should focus on the principles agreed by Cabinet rather than the detailed scheme that may emerge later. Although, of course, in the confidential pages, we have quite a lot of details of what those schemes may look like. And we are happy with that approach. The purpose of this hearing is therefore straightforward. By the end of today's discussion, we believe the committee should be able to answer 5 questions. Firstly, was there sufficient evidence for Cabinet to conclude that the site is generally surplus to operational requirements now and for the future? Secondly, was there sufficient evidence to conclude that disposal below best consideration satisfies the 1, 2, 3 test? Thirdly, did Cabinet have sufficient information before making those decisions? Fourthly, how did Cabinet become so certain about what the future of this site should be before alternative options had been openly explored? And I hope the call-in committee have had a chance to listen to the speeches that were said during the Cabinet meeting when this decision was made. Finally, can residents have confidence that every reasonable option and every relevant voice was considered before the future of one of the Council's strategic public assets was narrowed? These are not political questions, they are governance questions. Throughout today's presentation, my colleagues and I will examine those questions from different perspectives. We hope the committee will approach them in exactly the same way. I'll hand over to Councillor Dillow.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to focus on some key areas where I think this committee needs some clear answers. The first is the evidence behind the decision itself. Cabinet has concluded that Vine Meadow is surplus to operational requirements, and that's a huge conclusion because everything else flows from it. So what evidence actually led to that decision? Who carried out the assessment and when? Was the end decision decided and then possibly the evidence then reverse engineered? Was it based simply on how the car park is used today, or did it look ahead at what Basingstoke will need in the future? For example, did the assessment take account of the government's significantly increased housing targets that councils are now expected to deliver? The regeneration of Southam and Buckskin is high density. Why is a low density option for Norden okay? Many down north alone will see around 3,500 new homes built over the next decade. That's thousands more residents, many of whom are likely to commute by rail into London. Was that future demand for station parking factored into the assessment? And this second area is I think that we need some clear answers, is the use of Section 123 of the Local Government Act. Now, Cabinet is proposing to dispose of the land at less than best consideration because it believes doing so will improve the economic, social or environmental well-being of the area. The principle isn't really the issue, it's the evidence behind that conclusion. What evidence demonstrated those benefits? Were they measured in any meaningful way? And were they compared against any other realistic options? Basically, how do we know this is the best option? Were members presented with a proper comparison between retaining the site, leasing it, entering into a joint venture, or maybe pursuing a mixed-use scheme, or any other realistic alternative? For example, Norden is one of the borough's most underserved wards when it comes to accessible green space. Was returning this land to open public green space even considered as an option? If not, why not? If all of these comparisons exist, then I believe scrutiny should have the opportunity to see them all. Thank you, Chair.
Evening, Chairman. The final issue we would like the committee to consider is the consultation on ultimately the public confidence in how this decision was reached. During the cabinet debate, which I was there as an audience, we've heard comments such as, in our ward, and as ward councillors, we've knocked on every neighbour's door. So let me say immediately, there's absolutely nothing wrong with councillors engaging with the residents in their wards. In fact, we would expect them to do exactly that. But Wine Meadow is not just simply a ward matter. Wine Meadow is a strategic public asset. It belongs to every council taxpayer across this borough. So the decisions about its future must therefore reflect the interest of the whole borough, not just one part of it. And our concern is not who cabinet members spoke to. Our concern is who they didn't speak to, and whether everyone with a legitimate interest had a fair opportunity to have their voice heard. Chairman, this is the point, and the committee, this is the point we are asking the committee to reflect on. If informal conversation with a relatively small number of residents help to shape the cabinet's thinking, how can we be confident those views reflect the wider public interest? What opportunity was there for residents across the rest of the borough who also own this public asset as taxpayers to have their say? And what about residents in Southam and Buckskin or neighbouring Winklebury or Popley, many of whom would be directly affected by these decisions? As Councillor Dillo mentioned, there will be houses being built and there will be people commuting and there will be impact on those wards. So were they given the same opportunity to contribute? If resident views are going to influence a strategic decision of this scale, then surely every affected community should have an equal opportunity to be heard. And this is precisely why formal consultations exist. It creates a transparent, fair and consistent process where local residents, borough-wide residents, businesses, town centre users and other stakeholders all have the same opportunity to participate, which brings us to the central question. Before narrowing the future of this site, where was the structured assessment of the alternative options? Were they considered? And how did Cabinet satisfy itself that all reasonable alternatives had been properly considered? Chairman, public confidence is not built simply by making decisions. It is built by showing that those decisions have been reached through an open, transparent and evidence-led processes that everyone can have confidence in. So that respectfully is the issue we ask is the committee to consider today. Thank you, Chairman, and I'll hand back over to Councillor Simon Minnesbaum.
Thank you, Councillor Ganesh. So, thank you to my colleagues. Together we hope we have demonstrated that this call-in is not about opposing development or frustrating affordable housing, but as we said at the beginning, about getting the very best possible deal and making sure that we can demonstrate we have looked at absolutely every single option in our assessment. It's about ensuring that decisions of this significance are supported by evidence, transparency, and good governance. Did Cabinet have sufficient information before making this decision? And of course, we will raise some of that detailed evidence because it is contained in the private papers. Did Cabinet narrow the future of this strategic public asset before alternative options had even been properly explored? We will see from the papers there are a long list of things which have not been explored in detail, and our Constitution asks us to ensure that is what happens in a decision-making process. We'll look at the benefits described in the confidential papers, and is that payback enough? We're talking about significant figures, and maybe we should be looking for much better benefits. Residents need to have confidence that the process that we investigate and that they hear about is sufficiently broad-ranging and that we hear all the voices. I'm not sure there is a site that can get any closer to one of the most important strategic assets of this borough, Basingstoke Town Railway Station. Scrutiny exists not simply to review decisions, but to strengthen public confidence so that they know we make good quality decisions. Hopefully, the committee will agree that we've tried our best to be constructive, and we will, of course, go into more detail with the remaining time that we have, Chair, in the private session. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ninus-Bound. Okay, so just so you know, you've got just over 14 minutes left of your 25 minutes. Good. So, in accordance with our procedure for tonight, I'm going to invite the Cabinet members here tonight to make any comments. So if I could ask either Councillor Harvey or Councillor Gavin James to address us.
Good evening, Chair, and thank you for the signatories who have raised their questions. I think the first thing to talk about is best value and how you determine best value. I think sometimes we forget that we are a council. We're here to provide services. We're a housing authority. We're here to provide housing. We are not an investment body. We are not a pension fund. We are not a property portfolio. We only hold investment properties in order to fund the services that we deliver. So our priority is always delivering great services and making the town a great place to live. So therefore, best value or great deals cannot be measured purely in money alone. And that's very much sits behind this decision. The decision to narrow the range was taken effectively back in that decision in 2022 at full council, fully endorsed, that we needed to look at whether we could accelerate the delivery of affordable housing, which had fallen for many years leading up to that point, by using council-owned land as a lever to get affordable homes delivered. So it was a full council decision. So the range was effectively narrowed at that point in terms of what we were viewing as use for this land. So we went through a process of looking at all council-owned land, ruling out the obvious like play areas and parks and that property that's obviously very valuable in terms of raising investment revenue, and end up with a suite of sites, a small range of sites, disappointingly small perhaps, where there was potential that needed to go then through a viability test. And by the end of that process, Vine Meadow was the one remaining car park. You've obviously got the papers that go through the car parking analysis and the use of the car park and how that's changed, particularly since the pandemic, and the fact that we're now 3-4 years on from the pandemic and restrictions have gone and the usage hasn't risen back to its previous levels. We're quite comfortable with the analysis that's been done by experts to say that the car parking is surplus and remains surplus many years after the pandemic. There is still question marks about the viability of the site being used for housing. So when we talk about we may not get best value or we sell it at an undervalue, that's indicative of being realistic. We don't want to frighten off potential RPs. We recognise that it may not get the value we would on the open market. Obviously, when it comes down to it, we'll see whether any bids come in, and if any offers do come in, we'll look at the scheme, we'll consider how acceptable the scheme is, and then, of course, the whole thing will go through the process of disposal, which means it comes to scrutiny committee to look at the specific scheme. So at present, it may not be an undervalue. I don't know. It's an estimate we make that it could potentially be, and we still want to invite RPs on board. We do not set a value or restricted value, or certainly not in public, a limited value of what we might accept for the land, recognising that in a competitive market, you leave the door open for people to make their bids and you see what bids come in. I think it's really key to deliver affordable housing, and I think particularly in the town centre. There's been a frustration, and I know the chair, in fact, was involved in one of those frustrations when people come along and converted office blocks with permitted development rights where there is no affordable element required. So if you look at Normandy House, 0% affordable. You look at Churchill Plaza, 0% affordable. We know packaged living is in a pipeline, 0% affordable. We as councillors are all committed to delivering 40% affordable. If you have lots of large sites like those delivering 0%, somewhere you've got to deliver more than 40%, and that's our hope on this site. So the political decision is that we think it's important to provide affordable housing. We've gone through and found the only site that may have potential at the present time. I'm not suggesting we stop here. I think this is something we revisit in years to come. In terms of the density, the analysis was done based on density, looking at current building costs. There is a rising cost of building, and particularly high density. The costs are pretty difficult, and you can see delays in building high rise at the current time. So that was felt to be the scheme that would most likely represent value and balance the books for the RP who is successfully winning the bid. So we'll, but obviously we don't know at this stage what schemes will emerge and how we'll consider those schemes. That's really down to the detail. In terms of the consultation process, there is obviously a very large consultation process that takes place at the end of all of this, and that's called the planning process, where it will have to go through the planning process because it's a development of a scale that's likely to, subject to what changes in the MPPF and everything else. So there will be a consultation based on that. Obviously, when it goes to scrutiny, if an acceptable offer comes in, there's another opportunity for the public to be involved. I think one of the challenges we have is, as a council, sometimes you have to make decisions you believe are right because you're elected to make those decisions. We cannot consult on every single thing we do. And certainly if I think back to some of the developments where we've done a similar thing before, going back to 2016, when the land at Paddock Road in South Ham, which was disposed of by BDBC, the old surgery site, with no capital receipt to deliver affordable homes. Or we can look at May Street and Lower Brook Street. It's a very small site there, 2016 again, where the council transferred land at nil value to a company to build housing on the basis it was going to be affordable housing. So it's something we have done in the past with sites. This is possibly one of the larger sites we've looked at, but clearly at the moment this is just sounding out RPs. It's important to send a message to RPs that this is coming. Please engage with bids. We don't want to send it out to the open market because they won't bother applying because they'll realise they can't compete with private builders that will look to build 100% not affordable. So that's the process we've gone under. Obviously, the proof will really come back when we actually get offers or not. And if we don't get offers, then there will be another further discussion about Vine Meadow car park and whether or not part of the site is no longer parking, all of the site ceases to be parking, whether we go onto the open market and sell it or whether we keep it as parking or indeed turn it into something else. That'll be a decision for a new authority, I suspect, because the bidding process will probably get to the point where we expire. So I'm certainly satisfied that we've gone as far as we can at this stage. I think we've done everything in the right way at this stage. Clearly, in terms of the disposal process of operational land is subject to the value, the 123 valuation. If it does go above £500,000, it will have to go through the disposal approach outlined in the Constitution, and that includes visiting scrutiny, where you'll be looking specifically at a scheme rather than at the moment just a principle.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting to think about the journey that the affordable housing programme has been on, starting in that full council meeting, where there was a full and very vigorous debate about not only the lack of affordable housing, but the role of this council in enabling affordable housing and how we can do more in so many different ways. That decision was taken at full council to support the motion. It went to a committee. The committee spent considerable time reviewing the detail of the options available, opportunities for affordable housing in this borough. It didn't just go to one committee, it went to two, because when the Accelerated Affordable Housing Programme was drawn up, it was examined by the Resident Services Committee in some considerable detail. The discussion enabled members to advocate quite clearly and quite understandably that we needed to get on with it and we needed to actually deliver something, and we needed to show intent as an authority, as an administration, based upon that motion that was passed. So the Affordable Housing Programme not only came out of the motion, came out of the process of consideration at a number of committees, it was included in the Council Plan priorities very clearly. That Council Plan priorities was amended by the new administration that took over in 2023. And again, the emphasis on affordable housing was something that we took very seriously and was emphasised by councillors throughout the chamber. The officers took that as a clear political steer, as a clear steer from council, that what we wanted to do was examine the opportunities of sites that this council owned to bring forward affordable housing. And by affordable housing, what we mean, and I think I want to be really specific here, is socially rented housing. Not affordable rent and not other products, but socially rented housing that residents in our borough can actually afford. And that is a priority of this administration. In terms of the process that we've gone through, officers can set out clearly and in detail the work they have done to deliver on the priority that was set them. Not only in terms of the car parking studies that were done, the updated car parking studies building upon work that had been done historically relating to our town centre, but updated for the purposes of understanding the current position. And then on viability, a very clear analysis of the viability of this site in order to take an in-principle decision. And I think that's the really important point, an in-principle decision. And I really am intrigued to understand what other options available really means. What else are you thinking of that you might want to build on this site? I would love the signatories to explore that with them. What are you actually after? A warehouse? A block of flats? What is it that you're talking about? Because you say you're not opposing affordable housing, but then again you are opposing affordable housing. So you can't have it both ways. Either the structure of a proposal comes forward in the means to deliver socially rented housing, which is not the easiest to deliver on a town centre brownfield site, with all of the issues that go with it, and we make a decision in order to proceed to deliver those houses because that's a priority we've set ourselves, or you are genuinely on a fishing expedition for something completely different. I think the decision and transparency and openness has been throughout the process because you have had every chance to debate this since May 2022, I think it was, when the original motion was passed. And at no point in any committee has anybody spoken out against the disposal of council sites for the delivery of socially rented or affordable housing. And in fact, if I go back to the record here, in the previous administration, it was perfectly a regular process here. I see it on Paddock Road, in Brook House, on D-side in Buckskin, on the Aldermaston Triangle site, on Harlech House in Winkleberry, where time after time this council has chosen to use its land at nil value based upon an appropriate process to deliver betterment for our residents. So what is it that we decide betterment is? We've debated affordable housing, and I think socially rented housing is a betterment. So the process, and that's the key point that you're concentrating on, the process. We have yet to know whether any RP will bid. We are yet to see any proposals. We are yet to see the valuation of any of those proposals. And all of that will be subject to the constitutional process. This decision was made in the full knowledge of our officers, in the full recommendation and support of our officers, and Cabinet have confidence in what we have done to take this decision thus far. So I respect the point about public confidence, but I think the decision-making process is robust. The evidence presented was robust. The experts that have given that evidence is robust. The process we have followed is robust. And if you are suggesting otherwise, it would be intriguing to understand exactly where you think we have gone wrong. Because as far as the Constitution is concerned, there is thus far nothing that has been pointed out that is constitutionally in error. And there is a whole process to go. It feels a little bit like you jumped the gun. But then again, it was in the press of the Gazette this morning, so it's already been all over the pages of the press and on Facebook. So maybe that's what the intention was. But the point being, if this decision proceeds, there is an entire process to follow. And it will be scrutinised, it will be subject to scrutiny, and it will be transparent and open as it has been to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I would appreciate your comments, but I would say that under the Constitution, if there is a call in, and that is one that is deemed to be valid by the monitoring officer, then it is the role of this committee to consider the concerns and the questions raised by.
Absolutely, Chair.
So.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Good. Okay. So, committee, it's now. No. We're not going. We're not dealing with that point. So, I'll continue. Committee now is an opportunity for you to ask any questions of the cabinet members, and can we ensure that we don't stray into any of the confidential items, and bear in mind that we're going to need tonight to either come to a conclusion that this is a sound decision, or that there's grounds on which we need to agree amongst ourselves that suggests that we should be referring this decision back to the cabinet. So if we could bear that in mind, how we approach this. So are there any questions or from committee members, for cabinet members or officers? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. It's not really a question for the Cabinet members, it's a question for everyone. I would like to see a show of hands who has parked in Festival Place in the last 2 years. Have you parked in Festival Place in the last 2 years? Just put your hands up if you parked in Festival Place.
What, the Festival Place?
Yeah. Have you? Yeah? I think we all have. Who's parked in Vine Car Park in the last 2 years? One?
I have an excuse. I can't get my vehicle under the gate.
That's quite a good excuse. I mean, I hadn't even heard of Vine Car Park until this call-in. I'm just very surprised that it's not surplus to requirements. We have Festival Place, we have central car parking, we have Jacob's Yard, etc., etc., etc. We should be using more buses and public transport, and I mean, I can't see why we're here tonight.
Well, we're here tonight because there's been an approved call-in. Thank you, Councillor Jenkins, for that. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. As a user of Vine Road Car Park, my main use of Vine Road Car Park, I hasten to add, was as a commuter to London because of its close proximity to the station, and I preferred to go to London by public transport rather than drive for two reasons. One, environmental, two, the amount of time it would take to drive into London. My question is for the Cabinet members, and it's trying to reconcile what you've said in public arena with what the call-in councillors said in the public arena. What was the foremost consideration when arriving at the decision to dispose of Vine Road Car Park? Was it about we need to dispose of sites to find sites for affordable housing? Or was it a decision with a monetary dimension? And I realise that I can't go any further than that without going into confidential session.
Councillor
The foremost decision was, as instructed by full council, was to review all council-owned sites to see whether any of them could be used to deliver affordable housing. So that was the foremost. In terms of the car park itself. There will be revenue implications if you get rid of a car park. We accept that, but at the moment, in principle, at this stage, because we've not seen the shape of the deal, we think it delivers good value because there are more people on the housing waiting list than there are waiting outside a car park.
Any other questions from the committee? Councillor Connor, if I can, while you're looking at that, Councillor Trump.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me if I've got the process wrong or I've not read something properly, but how would Cabinet properly assess whether disposing of a strategic town centre site at less than best considered representative value for money when Section 123 value has not been completed? But I think you've already answered it. But could you just clarify for me, please?
Yes, to clarify the process, if a scheme comes forward that we believe, and that the initial decisions, myself and Councillor Laura James, we believe from a housing perspective the scheme is good, and from a financial perspective the scheme is acceptable, at that point officers will get a 123 valuation. That will be then compared to the offer on the site that we receive. If there is a difference, if it's an undervalue, it will have to go to Cabinet via scrutiny. In any event, and obviously that's then when the whole thing will be scrutinised. If the difference in value is greater than £2 million, it goes beyond the decision of this council and has to go to Secretary of State for approval. I think it's unlikely in this case, but I don't know, and I wouldn't like to suggest the value. But that's the process. So there's no point getting a 123 valuation until you've got an offer that you can compare it against.
Councillor Trump.
Just a quick question in reference to Agenda Item 3 document, which is in the bundle. If we go to 1.3 of that, it states that looking at less than best consideration under the power of Section 123 Local Government Act, the basis that it is likely to contribute to the improvement of the economic, social, environmental well-being of the area and its residents by the delivery of affordable housing. Can you confirm that that's the core reason that you're standing behind on this?
Yes, we think providing more affordable homes and getting people off the waiting list is providing economic improvement for the well-being of the people of Basingstoke, particularly those who are currently in undersized accommodation.
So, what I'm not arguing against is that affordable housing. What I am arguing to is the point where the economic, social, environmental well-being is brought into the equation. I am not a lawyer, but I've read this and it seems to fly in the face of the position you put forward. The overview of Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972 does, under subsection 1, grant local authorities the ability to dispose of land in any manner they choose. Subsection 2, however, states that except with the Secretary of State's consent, disposal must not be for less than the best consideration reasonably obtainable. Monetary consideration is the focus. Social value that cannot be quantified is excluded. That's what it says. How do we identify whether this particular project satisfies that requirement?
If you get into legals, I'm not a lawyer either, so I shall probably turn to Anne to answer that question.
I think the first point is that there is an order that allows local authorities to make the decision up to £2 million. So it's only if you go over the £2 million that it goes to the Secretary of State. So Cabinet has the power to decide to sell land at an undervalue up to £2 million.
would that not come with a particular pressure, although I'm not referencing it does in this particular case, that there is almost an incentive to underplay value in order to come within that scope?
The test for the decision maker is to be satisfied that in disposing of land at an undervalue, that there's social, economic or environmental well-being from the project. That is the test. And if they're satisfied that there is social well-being because they're doing affordable housing, then that is a decision they're entitled to make.
For clarity, the 123 valuation is carried out not by the Cabinet or internal officers, it's carried out by an external agency to come up with a value they believe is correct for the site, had we put it on the open market. So just to reassure you that that's the valuation we start with. Now obviously, if the offer comes in and it's more than £2 million short of that valuation, it's a Secretary of State issue. If it falls within that range, then obviously it becomes a Cabinet decision, unless it comes in less than £250,000. In fact, it still has to go to Cabinet if it's an undervalue of any description. So it's not something we'll be deciding, it'll be an assessment made and then we'll be presented with. It will obviously then give an argument around the best value or whether or not that does achieve best value, but ultimately that's a bit subjective and that's a judgment call the Cabinet have to make via scrutiny.
Can I just make it clear to members that the original Cabinet decision delegated authority to the Director to make the final decision? It does not need to go back to Cabinet unless it's over and it needs Secretary of State's consent.
Right, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few questions, if that's all right. The first was in relation to process, point of clarification. My recollection is that our rules for the disposal of land and property set out that the disposal of land needs to go to the Strategic Property Board. Can we have confirmation as to whether that has happened, or if that didn't happen, what alternative procedure was followed? And then connected to that, my understanding is that those same rules set out an obligation to produce a detailed site options analysis covering feasibility and alternatives. Has that been produced, that site options analysis? If not, I think perhaps one of the things that might be useful to come away from this meeting is for that work to be undertaken. I think that probably is question one for the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Okay, the officer, the director is going to respond to that. Thank you, Fiona.
It was just in terms of the board. We don't have, the LGA advised the council some years ago to move away from the board format, and so it didn't go to that board. The constitution is out of date, and we will be looking to look at the constitution again as part of the move to the new unitary. So no, it didn't go to the board. And in answer to your second question, there was a detailed site options analysis. Wasn't there, Grant?
I think we go back to the origins of the site coming forward. So the site was coming forward because of the council's priority to deliver affordable housing. So the process of bringing that site forward was in the context of the council's priority to deliver affordable housing. So the options that were looked at related to how that priority could be delivered and the implications of that priority in terms of things like viability, capacity, and the technical issues around use of the car park. So all that technical work that led to the decision was in the context of that affordable housing priority.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you for the clarification on the board and the acknowledgement that we will be moving forwards with amendments to the constitution. I look forward to views on timescales of that. But just to explore that point about site options, which is of course something that the signatories have brought forwards, and is of course a very material point if we are making a decision about how to dispose of this land, whether we have considered the various different alternatives. If that work has been undertaken, but you're saying to me that we have, as a council, decided that the goal we have in mind is the most important, and that this, I'm slightly concerned by the implications of what you've said. Were we working with our site options analysis here towards that end goal, such that the options and technical work was being engineered towards that goal, or was the site options work undertaken impartially and then consideration undertaken based on that report of what it is that the council administration sought to do and wishes to do? Because there's a difference, having been in Cabinet before, there is a difference between impartial objective site options work and the decision that you then take forwards. And my slight concern from what's just been said is that perhaps the order and sequencing of that was not right. I think it would be useful to get a view on that.
There was a site process. So yes, you're right. The starting point was, can any council site deliver or accelerate the delivery of affordable housing? That was a council decision. We're bound by it. Then all sites were looked at. Now, clearly, we didn't publicly frighten everybody by saying we're looking at every single spot of council land. There were some sites that ruled themselves out. So the site that you have before you tonight is one that was selected, not because it's the one we looked at and got the evidence to fit it. Evidence was gathered over time. In fact, indeed, in the confidential evidence, there were 3 or 4 sites that got to the final sort of hurdle. They were assessed. This was the only site left standing as having that potential at the current time. So it wasn't a case of we want to build it there. It was a case of we want to provide more affordable housing. So let's look at all the sites. A bit like when you sort of do the local plan. You look at all the sites that have been promoted and you sort of go through them. So that was the process that was undertaken to get to where we are. It wasn't a case of can we get the evidence to fit Vine Road. It's that Vine Road is the one that came closest to potentially, we don't know at this stage, fitting the criteria.
Councillor Carr.
I thank the Cabinet member for his response. I think my point, drawing on our own rules of procedure, is that I would have expected a site options analysis for this particular site rather than a broader view on different sites across the borough, which of course is a sensible and an important piece of work in itself. So it feels to me that that site options piece of our process work was missing. And realistically, that's the sort of thing I would have expected to see ahead of that Cabinet decision, even if that options analysis itself would have been in confidential papers. So it feels to me that there is an absence there. But I want to move on to a second point.
Can I just stop you there?
Yes.
Yeah. I just think with my sort of constitutional hat on, I am concerned that this is a key asset of the council. There is a responsibility to obtain best value, and I am concerned that we've got clearly set out procedures for the disposal of land and property in the Constitution, and I am concerned that the process which should involve a detailed site options feasibility study, followed by a referral to the strategic property board, has not been, doesn't seem to have been complied with here. And so purely from a constitutional point of view, I have to say that does give me some concerns. Yeah, thank you.
Help you with that. Obviously, again, we go back to the in principle. So the Cabinet have made an in principle decision to explore this option of and proceed with it if the right offer comes in. So in terms of disposal, now that may be that no alternative offers come in, and then of course if we still decide to dispose of the land, we would go through the process as set out. At the moment we're effectively at the start of the process, because the start of the process is to inform all councillors of a decision. And that's what the Cabinet paper did. It informed all councillors of a decision that we've made. At the point of disposal, then of course you're kicking with the disposal procedures that's set out in the Constitution. Other options can be considered. What I would say is if we get a acceptable offer, there is a question mark whether it's best use of taxpayers' money to get a full options analysis drawn up when in fact the reason you're releasing the site is to deliver affordable homes, and therefore you're not likely to consider any alternative that came forward in that analysis. But constitutionally, if we have to do it, we'll do it.
Yeah, that doesn't really address the fact that the Strategic Property Board has not been involved in this, and that what we have here is a decision, because it is a decision that unless it's referred back tonight by the committee, there is delegation now to the director, the officer, to take this forward. So it is a decision. It's not a case, you can't be half pregnant, I think, is the point here. If I can call it that.
Just on that Strategic Property Board, obviously it's evolved, although essentially probably is the same as the board was, in the sense that generally speaking there is the Director of Regeneration, there is the Head of Property, the Head of Finance and myself sit as a quad discussing most matters. This particular topic, because it involved housing and a housing policy and housing strategy, because this obviously was in the housing strategy, it was approved by full council, plus it impacts on parking, it became such a cross-departmental thing that it has been to regular cabinet briefings to be discussed as a sort of wider board.
Yeah, but there's still procedures under the Constitution in how you deal with the disposal of operational
I think
property.
it's worth, Chair, I think it's worth the officers setting out a particular view on this.
Chair,
I think that would be a good idea, Councillor Harley. Thank you.
Chair, I was just going to draw the committee's attention to the supplementary note that was provided. So this is an operational asset. It's not a investment property that would usually go to the Property Investment Board, because it's based on existing use value, not upon income.
Yeah, it still would need to go to the Strategic Property Board. Right, any further questions? Councillor Carr.
With respect, Chair, that's not what the officer just said.
No, Councillor Harvey, the officer was referring to an investment property, and this is an operational property. Yeah. So, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just moving on slightly to a different aspect of this, if possible. I think it's important to recognise the difference between, as we are tonight, a decision in principle and something in concrete terms. So if I reflect back onto the council motion on affordable housing of 2022, that was a motion where we were looking at how we could accelerate affordable housing delivery, and it did look at the principle of council-owned sites as a potential lever. But there is a big difference between that and any particular site that comes forwards. So I think it's important not to use the motion to wholly cover up questions of this. I think you have to consider both the principle that we have explored and in practice, in particular terms, the sites. I speak from some experience from being the cabinet member who looked at small sites and considered possible options for affordable housing delivery at the time. And what was really important for each particular site is that you were looking at the individual merits of specific sites. So taking a view that, in general, the borough wishes to accelerate affordable housing, and that, in general, we are willing to use council-owned property to achieve that, does not automatically enable or allow the use of any specific site. You've got to look at the site in particular, which is why we were exploring the question of options analysis. And I think linked to that, it draws us to the question of best value. Because if we are agreed that affordable housing is a good that we wish to accelerate, we also have to recognise on the other side of the equation that the health of the local authorities' finances is a public good, because when those get out of kilter, that puts pressure on local taxpayers. And when we also have to recognise that all of the assets owned by local councils, this council, are assets held by the public, by taxpayers. So we also have to consider what is in the best interest of the taxpayer and the best interest of those on our housing waiting list who need affordable housing. So it feels to me there are actually two elements of this that need to be considered. And that leads me, I think, to my question, which is specifically around the decision to go for 100% affordable on this site, which speaks to the point about narrowing options at the beginning. It would be useful to understand, I think, why 100% affordable on this site was decided upon, when the truth of the matter is that there are very considerable costs in developing a site of this nature within the town, brownfield, remediation, all those additional costs that need to go into it. And my concern is that a decision to go to 100% affordable necessarily means that the viability is more challenging, which necessarily means that there's a larger amount of public subsidy that will be involved. So it'd be useful to understand the Cabinet members or the office's view on why 100% was fixed upon, and whether other breakdowns of market or affordable were explored.
Thank you. Who's going to answer that?
It's certainly in relation to 100% affordable housing. There are reasons why that's a particularly desirable objective, taking into account the sustainability of the site numbers, etc., but primarily that's driven by the funding regime that comes from Homes England, particularly when you're looking to develop social rented accommodation. So 100% affordable on small sites, I guess there's a discussion around what is a small site, would be a desirable objective.
Yes, please do.
It's intriguing, isn't it, just thinking through this point about what has gone on historically. There are sites that we've developed for 100% affordable housing that range from 190 units at the old deck maisonettes in Fremantle and Taverner Close, right the way through to Harlech Hall, which was demolished and replaced with affordable housing, where we have chosen to do so because it is in the best consideration analysis of being in the social and well-being and the good of the community to do so. This is not an atypical process. This council has made decisions historically where it has put the priority of affordable housing first to do so in the decisions that it has made. It is not something fresh, new or atypical. It is a part of the process this authority has gone through on many occasions to do so. So the 100% affordable housing is actually something we've done and achieved and been successful at in both previous administration and the current administration. And it is something at the moment where the grant affordable, the Homes England grant that's available for affordable housing is particularly important to the viability of schemes.
Okay. Councillor, I think it's Councillor McCormack next, and then Councillor Trum.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question for the leader because he's just mentioned two previous examples where I was convinced in my own mind that the right decision was made to regenerate, namely Harlech Hall and Fremantle Close. Were there any other viable options on the table in those two schemes? The decision not to regenerate Fremantle Close, how would that have benefited the community? And in the case of Harlech Close, we had a derelict condemned hall that had previously been used by the Sea Scouts and it had been a polling station. But the option not to redevelop that would have meant leaving it as a derelict hall that would have needed demolishing anyway. So I'm intrigued why he's squaring that with Vine Road car park, which is an operational asset and generating revenue for the council.
point being made was that Harlech Hall, and in terms of community provision in Winklebury, I'm not so sure about that one. It could have been rebuilt, but the decision was taken. It wasn't a case of someone looked at Harlech Hall and thought, let's see what we could do with it. Could we put an office there? Could we put this there? Could we put... No, it was specifically agreed that that would be used for affordable housing because it was a priority for the area. Probably the right decision. The other one that was mentioned, it was absolutely the right decision. We didn't have a full options analysis because the demand there was for affordable homes, and therefore there wasn't a all options analysis of that site. The site was identified as something that could be used for affordable homes. It was a priority for the administration at the time, and it was done. And so this is happening in a very similar way where we are looking to use council land. So it wasn't a criticism of those schemes, it was just highlighting those schemes, giving an example of where this authority over many years has often taken opportunities to accelerate delivery of affordable homes in this way.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Trum.
Thank you, Chair. At a time when Southam and Buckskin are getting on the receiving end of high density plans, if that phrase can actually be used at the moment with the greyness that surrounds it, but it's certainly high density. It appears that it was raised previously. It appears that it seems okay for Buckskin and Southam to get high density, and that's okay and that's affordable. But here, it's not really available. And whilst I get the idea of 100% affordable, if it's low density, 100%, why not high density, and some of it to sell off to generate additional income and resources? You have either the similar or better results in the creation of affordable housing if you have the higher density placed. Thank you.
Grant, if you'd like to respond to that.
So I suppose there are two aspects there. One is the statement that Buckskin and Southam is high density, which isn't a fact, actually. Just to make a point, it's not high density, it's potentially higher density, but that doesn't mean high density. The proposals for Vine Meadow, going back to the technical studies and the process that we've been through, we have been through and tested through viability, through capacity and viability reports. So the capacity report did a high, medium and low density option, which were then subject to viability considerations. What came out of that was that in the context of build costs and funding regimes at the moment, a low density scheme was coming out, albeit still at a negative value, we're still coming out as the most viable scheme. So that's the work that was undertaken by officers to justify an approach. As things stand at the moment, we haven't got a scheme, whether it be medium, low. I suspect that high density just won't work on cost. But in terms of what the eventual density might be proposed for that site, we still don't actually know.
We're in danger of straying into the confidential topics here, I think. Yeah.
This might get a smile. We have a new Prime Minister, young Mr. Burnham has arrived. He's got a backstory which is very encouraging of councils to be able to build their own council housing. I understand that one of the reasons why we're not able to do that is there's some technical features surrounding that, and one of them is funding. Now, it occurred to me that the disposal at this point, when the man's barely got his knees under the desk, might not necessarily be the point to make such decisions, because if there is a change led by the Prime Minister, that change may indeed bring benefits to the taxpayers locally and the project to create additional housing in a different manner. I wonder what your thoughts would be on that.
Thank you, Councillor Trump. Who would like to respond on that? Kate, would you like to?
In terms of the reasons why it's not cost effective to go forward with a direct delivery model, Those were explored and evaluated in quite depth in both of the previous committee reports that I can forward to you after the meeting. Essentially, there are a whole host of factors around. Yes, we wouldn't be able to even get grant funding, and even if that were to be changed by the new Prime Minister, there are so many other factors that we would need to get off the ground in terms of the internal infrastructure around becoming a landlord again, etc., etc. So when we look at the tone and the options considered in the previous reports, it was never ruled out, but the factors have never existed, and officers would recommend still do not exist for the council to be re-entering direct delivery. So if the government, that there is a lot of discussion around council house building, I suspect that the attractiveness for that would be for those councils who are already stockholding and may already be developing at the moment. But there are a hell of a lot of doors to go through in terms of it being cost effective, either for Basingstoke and Deane or for North Hampshire, none of whom have housing stock. So I think if we were to say, let's wait and see what happens, it would be an extremely long wait.
Okay, thank you, Kate.
If I could just add to that, I think it's important to consider, one, the significant number of changes to the law that is going to be required to get authorities who disposed of their stock in the 90s back into the game of building council houses again. And I think from our perspective, it was, and different people may take a different view of this, many of the issues we face today and many of the issues that you're highlighting flow from the fact that this council made a political decision in the 1990s to sell off all our housing stock to housing associations that were a very different beast back in 1990s compared to what they are today.
Councillor Trum.
If I may just come back on that, I agree wholeheartedly that there's a lot of problems that have come forward from the selling off of council stock, and my in-tray is full of them. And one of the reasons why I'm so vested in this particular area is because of the experience that my constituents and others have trying to deal with those organisations that are currently, in my view, falling somewhat short in delivering the services that we should expect as a council to deliver to them. So certainly with regard to the affordable housing and the way in which tenants are treated, I think we really should look in as many ways as possible to up our game. In relation to the Andy Burnham question, I appreciate the expertise of our colleague in presenting the issues, but the guy's just rocked up. I'm sure he's got a plan, and part of that plan may be something that would empower councils and simplify the process. And until we give the guy a chance, we're not necessarily going to know that. And maybe coming from a reform councillor, that might raise a smile somewhere.
The only comment I would make in response to that is that going back to the very original motion, it was about accelerating affordable housing and how to reach that outcome in the most expeditious way. Hear what you're saying, that any new Prime Minister, any new government can change policy, can change legislation, but the thrust around this was to deliver affordable housing as quickly as possible. And we've already identified that we've got the year just gone with a small deficit in affordable housing delivery against our target and next year. So to wait and wait would simply be to exacerbate and overlook opportunities to do that now.
Councillor Carr, and if we can sort of have a succinct comment or question, that would be great.
Of course, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to explore then combining 2 points into one. How this proposed disposal in principle interrelates with 2 elements of the planning environment that we have to deal with now. So the first is around this question of density. And in the draft NPPF, there is a very strong push from the government to say that sites next to railway stations, or indeed within walking distance of railway stations, must achieve very high levels of density. I think the number is something like 50 dwellings or so per hectare. Could the team confirm whether there has been consideration of that policy how density considerations have taken that into account. The reason I asked the question is because there is some concern that if too low a density were pursued, would the Secretary of State perhaps call this in and say, actually, this is not an acceptable way of moving forwards? And if we get close to that subsidy point where Secretary of State consideration is required, then that is quite a material point. Because it is surprising that a site of this size is being used for, I think, 46 homes at the low density model, when it is an incredibly valuable site if you are going to use it for housing. You're going to put housing on a site that close to a railway station. I think lots of people would be surprised that just 46 homes were being considered. That's not necessarily a particularly optimised and efficient use of land. I think you have to really bear that in mind, whether we are getting the best use of land here if we are going to move ahead with this for residential. And the second policy point on this relates to the question of funding. There is an assumption within the paperwork that we've been presented that funding will be secured. But I'd just like to get some understanding of the kinds of grants that we are thinking about here. Because my understanding is that Homes England do expect an optimised use of land. So would there be some concern that we aren't actually optimising this land to deliver enough affordable? That may be a Homes England concern I think we need to think about. And then I think I'm right in saying that there does need to be a sort of a split, 2/3, 1/3 social rent and shared ownership, as happened with, I think, Merton Rise for Vivid. So it'd be useful just to understand, from your perspective, the Homes England anticipated position.
Yeah. So just on the first part of that, I mean, you're absolutely right. The government and the MPPF have highlighted the scope for increased density around transport hubs based around sustainability and the desirability of maximising use of land. As set out in the reports that Cabinet have considered, officers have talked with colleagues across the council, in this case including planning and planners. So whilst that is a general presumption in the MPPF, it is still moderated through site specifics and particular considerations associated with particular locations and local circumstances. As alluded to in the reports officers have put forward, Vine Meadow is subject to significant constraints, including bordering a conservation area, significant trees on that boundary, and there's also a residential block to the southern part of the site. All of those mitigate against high density, high-rise development in terms of planning, not viability. So I'm just saying that the site-specific considerations over and above that generic NPPF presumption tend to override the suitability of Vine Meadow for the sort of development that's envisaged in that NPPF document.
Chair, if I can just add to that, the MPPF document is of course still a draft and we're all waiting for the final version. It's out for consultation, so I don't think you can necessarily assume that that will be in the final version. It may be, but we don't know.
Okay, do you
Shall
want
I
to
pick up the
answer question 2?
To be honest, Councillor, I'm not a technical expert in terms of the intricacies of Homes England funding decisions, except that obviously our preferred partners would be strategic partners of Homes England and can therefore directly funnel that funding in within the framework that they've agreed with Homes England. So our assumption would be that when putting forward a scheme, they would do that in the knowledge that they could stream that funding into it. So it would be, in conclusion, that we would get a scheme that the RPs knew was deliverable and was viable in their submission.
Okay, so are we now coming to the close of the public questions? Steve? I do apologise to Councillor Slimming. Would you like to ask a question or make a point?
Thank you, folks. You will see my name was added to the papers that I was the person who moved the original motion in December 22, when we must remember that the administration was not the one today. In fact, it's the one of the people opposite that are raising these questions. And indeed, it was passed unanimously by the council, and it went actually to the cabinet in January the following year and was approved, and the work started. And obviously, once we took over the administration, paperwork was presented to committees to approve the way forward. I think we need to go back to basic principles, and that was the whole point of the motion. And would the cabinet members agree with me that the motion was put forward in such a way that it gave council direction of travel of how we wanted to move forward and reduce the number of people in our borough that were currently on the waiting list, which at that time was over 5,500. And people wanted small properties, and we weren't able to deliver. Now, the administration previously actually had a record of delivering affordable homes. But their definition of affordable and my definition of affordable are totally at odds, because I was talking about what we used to call council houses, and which has been referred to as social rent. Now, Councillor Trum has mentioned that the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, has been talking about council houses at the moment. He comes from near me, so I talk the same vocabulary, if you like. I talked about council houses at the motion. And what we intended was to provide houses at social market rent, i.e. people in Basingstoke on the waiting list when a survey was done a year later. How many people could afford an affordable house in the definition of 80% of market rent? There were two people of that 5,000 plus people that could have afforded what was considered to be an affordable home. So to deliver the ones that we want to deliver, we have to look at 100% providers of social housing. And that is why the principle was agreed. On the principle, it was the direction that we wanted to go. We set a clear direction, unanimously agreed and discussed with all the councillors on the time, that we would move forward to produce that. And we have worked very hard. Unfortunately, not as fast as perhaps we could have done, but you've heard the problems of identifying sites. And why are we now arguing that that principle direction is now under threat? We passed a motion about climate change. We passed a motion about an environment emergencies. Nobody is questioning that our policies, our council priorities, are not following those things that were set out in those motions of the directions that this council should have. And so I firmly believe that by agreeing that motion and putting that forward, that we actually set the way forward that we wanted to make as a priority. At the end of the day, if the people don't come forward with a proposal that actually meets that, obviously we will have to look at options. But I do not understand why, at the moment, there is a question about this council's priority and what we are trying to deliver it. And would the cabinet members agree with me?
Councillor James.
Unsurprisingly, yes, I do agree with you. And I think, and lead there to the important point to make, really, which is, if we as a council, using our own land, will not deliver social housing, then we are accepting we will never have social housing. Because why would a private landowner do it? Why would anyone else do it? If we as a housing authority, the people responsible for housing the homeless, if we won't deliver social housing, I'm not sure anyone else is going to do it, albeit 40% is in that thing. But I think this is an opportunity, and we know, because we've been through all the sites, it's the only opportunity that we will have to honour that motion that we all supported to deliver a scheme that delivers 100% affordable housing, 100% social housing. We'll see what the options come forward from the RP, but I hope it's 100% social housing, because if we don't deliver it, it's not going to get delivered on any other kind of land.
Okay, thank you. I suppose there is a general distinction here between the principle of wanting to deliver affordable housing and the motion that came from full council, and also the on the other side, the particular circumstances of this decision, which is what we are looking at tonight. Councillor Trum, any?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Slewin, for your input on that. And I don't think there's any disagreement in here that the provision of social housing is a critical component of what council should be doing. And the focus here is in relation to this particular site and the manner in which it's progressing. And we have to look at all of the aspects, and you mentioned the environmental, and that is a key issue. And my colleague here brought up the issue of the proximity of the station, proximity of the town centre, all of the resources and all of the benefits that the individuals who could live in such a place could receive would need to be maximised, and the percentages, in my mind, are largely an irrelevance, because 100% of 40 odd is 40 odd, but 50% of 100 is 50. So it depends how we can work around to explore to get the greatest benefit of it. So moving to an issue that I wanted to address in relation to other points that were raised, the issue of parking. First of all, having read through the 22 and the 25 appraisals, they give numbers in relation to the parking spaces that are available, and the dynamism of the town, and the popularity of the town centre, and the resources and the economic powerhouse that we would wish to become does need parking provision, because especially if you're going to build large developments in the outskirts of town, people are going to have to drive in. Looking at the statistics that were shown, it's still clear that there is an upward curve in the utilisation of parking within
Councillor
the town.
Trum,
It's still climbing.
I'm going to stop you, because I think we're heading rapidly into sort of confidential information, sensitive, because the council is not operating in isolation with its car parking. There are competitor car parking operators, and so I think could we cover that in if we do agree?
Yes, sir. I defer to your wisdom on the matter. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Fine. So, Councillor Carr.
Just the final public comment on this before anything else. It was just to clean off two final points. The first is just picking up on the 100% affordable that we've been talking about. I wondered if the administration officers could reflect on how this sits against our local plan position in relation to 40% affordable. It seems very clear we have had for a very long time under more than one party a 40% affordable housing position, that is what you deliver with development. And one of the reasons that we've come to that view is because if you pepper pot market and affordable together, when you have mixed communities, you do generally end up having greater welfare, well-being, sort of stronger communities. Whereas I think my general concern is that if you are pushing towards 100% affordable and you are dividing communities, that does lead to, I think, adverse issues for both elements of that. So I'd be interested in the administration's reflection on the 100% affordable decision in that respect. And then the final point is just on the question of consultation, which is a process question. I think I'm right in saying that just 24 people responded to the consultation on whether this site should be disposed of. It would be useful to get a sense of what this consultation actually looked like. Who did we reach out to such that we only secured the views of 24 people? Because, of course, as the signatories have mentioned, that doesn't deliver a broad view of borough interests. And then there are some very striking omissions from that consultation. I'm not seeing the views of Network Rail, for example, which I'm sure would have a very clear view on parking around railway stations. I don't think there's been outreach to the commuters, other users, and the reason that's important is this town is going to grow significantly as a result of the government increasing by 37% our housing demands. So I would like, if possible, please, to get a view from the administration on why the consultation was so limited, what was the rationale for that, and how the 100% affordable position reconciles with our planning policy.
Who would like to respond to those two?
Tom first and then Grant.
Thank you. Yeah, just picking up the 100% affordable point. So Homes England, they only grant fund additionality in terms of affordable homes to the planning policy requirement. The only exception to that is if the site is 100% affordable. So if it was anything under 100%, it was probably going to deter interest from RPs because they wouldn't be applied grant funding to the whole site. Whereas if it's 100%, they can apply that grant funding to the entirety of the homes, including the 40% planning policy requirement. The balance of mixed communities point. So some of the submissions may include the provision of a limited number of shared ownership properties, which would support the overarching aim of delivering social rented housing. Obviously, we need to wait for those submissions to come through, and there's quite a lot of planning precedents in terms of 100% affordable sites meeting that balance of mixed communities point, and separation in tenure is quite important to that. So rented and shared ownership will kind of inherently create that balanced and mixed community. So that's all I wanted to say on that bit.
Thank you. Grant, thank you.
So the original report to Cabinet includes a section outlining the process of consultation that took place. It was actually 26 respondents who actually responded via putting in a survey, which obviously the number of people that attended that drop-in session and expressed a view was more than 26, but the 26 people were the ones that filled a survey on the issue. In terms of wider, so also to say that was an initial consultation that was to try and test the generic principle of the acceptability, primarily to people that lived adjoining to the site, although some of those who responded were car park users, was to test the principle of development and to get a sense of that. As the report set out, the approach to engagement and consultation of stakeholders is going to be a key element of assessment of the submissions that we hope to get from registered providers in terms of their methodology for engagement and consultation will be a critical part of that evaluation of those submissions. The final point on consultation, because you're talking about wider issues about Network Rail and car parking, etc., and commuters, the original car parking study was carried out in the context of the town centre master plan, which consulted with a whole range of different stakeholders and consultees. Whilst we haven't got access to detailed information from Network Rail, the issues around capacity and capacity for commuters for Basingstoke have been considered in relation to the question of whether that site is surplus to requirements.
Anything further? Councillor Trum.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to struggle with this as a calculation because if, as has been presented by a colleague over here, Homes England do better for us if we go for the 100%. Cool. Why don't we build more? How do we get to a point where, if we've got the best possible deal by going for the 100%, or how do we get to a ceiling which stops us going beyond that? I've never built properties, but to build a block of flats strikes me as much more cost effective than sticking a terrace of houses up. Why are we not getting 100% of more than the numbers that are on? And I look at the figures here, and that doesn't make sense to me. So if you can help me on that, that would be great.
Who would like to
I
respond?
think just to add to that, there is a balancing act to have. It's not completely to max out to anything to get 100% affordable housing, because then size, sustainability comes into it. There's a balancing act that will come through the RP zone consideration and also the planning considerations. So there's not a definitive answer to that, and it will always be site specific as well. And at the moment, we're just setting a framework, and we'll see what comes back through the bidding process.
Right, now, so am I right in thinking that we've dealt with all the public questions? The signatories did request that they have an opportunity to raise confidential questions, and that's something that the monitoring officer has approved. So, will we support moving into private session? Great. Okay. So the procedure is that the members have agreed that is now become that the meeting now becomes confidential by passing the following motion: that pursuant to section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting on the ground that the public interest is in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing it, and therefore that exempt information is likely to be exempt information is likely to be disclosed as defined in the appropriate paragraph of Schedule 12A of the Act. So at this point, I'm going to request that the webcast is turned off, but it will be turned back on once the discussion is over. And I'm going to ask members of the press and any members of the public or visiting councillors to leave the room, and we will let you know when. Can they stay? Oh, right. Councillor Miller, I do apologise. Yes, and yeah, I was referring to Councillor Miller, and let them know that they'll be brought back in again once the meeting is no longer confidential. So can we switch